Hey everyone, I did not think that I would be doing an emergency episode of the Utopia Football Podcast this soon after saying that I might do one in the next few weeks. As if you guys listened to the mailbag episode that dropped today, I believe, or maybe yesterday, I think this morning. I said, yeah, maybe throughout the off season, an emergency episode if big things pop. I didn't think it would be happening within 24 hours, but here we are. And DeMeco Ryans somewhat alluded to it earlier this week, but Bobby Slowik fired, Chris Strouser fired, Cole Popovich, assistant O-line coach, fired. That's the OC, the O-line coach, and the assistant O-line coach, all gone as of today. So big news with the Texans. Clearly the statement is that the offense failed this team this season, that the reason the Texans aren't still playing football this weekend is because of the offense. And whoever was behind that decision, ultimately it was DeMeco Ryans who pushed the red button. They're 100% right on this. So I'm excited about this, that there's going to be a new face for this offense calling the plays. I'm very interested to see kind of what the fallout is. Is this just the first in what will be several changes offensively with this team? But I've got 4 thoughts on this. So let's go with the 4 thoughts, and it'll probably turn into 5 or 6 before it's all said and done. My first prevailing thought was good for DeMeco Ryans. Good for DeMeco Ryans doing this. He proved to me that, at least with this decision, that he can be a wartime head coach. You guys heard me make the comparison many times on this podcast and on Payne and Pendergast that in The Godfather, the movie The Godfather, Tom Hagen, who was the consigliere, the advisor to The Godfather, got relieved of his duties because he was a good advisor in good times, but when it came to wartime, when the 5 families are battling, not a good wartime consigliere. And I think you can apply that same principle to head coaches. There are certain head coaches, I think, that are probably great head coaches to have when things are going well, but can they make the tough decisions when they need to be made? Or are they too loyal to people that don't deserve that loyalty? DeMeco Ryans proved today that he can be a wartime head coach by getting rid of his good friend, Bobby Slowik. So the decision to do all this, I think probably was maybe even beyond DeMeco Ryans and maybe even beyond Nick Caserio. The preservation and the handling of C.J. Stroud is the most important thing for the future of this franchise. So every decision that gets made, especially big decisions, the question needs to be asked, is this what's best for C.J. Stroud? So it would not shock me one bit if ownership at least gave their opinion on this, on getting rid of Bobby Slug. But ultimately, it's DeMeco Ryans who's making this decision, and I say good for him for moving on. Several people involved, but Bobby is a direct report to DeMeco Ryans. That's how things work in the HR world. So I'm happy to see that DeMeco Ryans has this club in his bag. Number 2, this can't be it. There's not an either or in terms of what was the worst part of this team, either the coordination of the offense or the blocking up front for C.J. Stroud, offensive line, tight end. This cannot be an either or where they bring in somebody at OC and at the O-line coach spot that feels like they can just fix everybody who's already here. There are guys on this team, on this offensive line, on this offense as a whole that are worth moving on from, very much so. So my hope is that this is the first piece in what is a multi-step process in getting this offense not back to where it was in 2023, better than it was in both 2023 and 2024. No more fucking around. That's what we're talking about here. So this can't be it. Like, this can't be, well, we fired the coaches, so let's bring in this guy who we think can fix Shaq Mason. No, Shaq Mason needs to go. Hard conversations need to be had about Titus Howard and what his future with the team is. Hard conversations need to be had about the young linemen they've drafted and put up there and put in those positions as to whether they're the right guys or not. The offensive line is clearly the biggest thing that needs to be fixed in terms of a position group. The offense is the biggest thing that needed to be fixed in terms of a side of the football. Big step today in firing Bobby Slowik, but that can't be the last step. There needs to be more significant steps along the way to show us that both Nick Caserio and DeMeco Ryans recognize the gravity of the situation with this offense. So that's number 2. Number 3, as far as the next offensive coordinator goes, I'm not somebody who's got a list of names ready to go. Seth talked about Chip Kelly this week on our show on Payne and Pendergast, and I thought it was a really interesting idea that possibly have Chip Kelly, who's been the OC at Ohio State this season, and obviously they just won a national championship, albeit at the collegiate level. But Chip Kelly has had more than a cup of coffee in the pros as a head coach. And obviously he coordinated those offenses on those teams he was on. He coached as well in Philadelphia his 1 year in San Francisco, which was not great. But I think Chip Kelly's a really good offensive coach. Seth brought up that Chip Kelly picked Jeff Stoutland as the O-line coach in Philadelphia when he was there. And Jeff Stoutland remains the O-line coach to this day in Philly. He survived multiple coaching changes there because he's excellent at what he does. Philly has a great offensive line every year. I say all that to say not, hey, go get Jeff Stoutland. You can't do that. He's under contract to the Eagles, and they ain't letting him go anywhere. Plus, he's kind of busy this weekend and maybe the next 2 weekends. But I say all that to say that I think one of the things that to me made no sense was hiring Bobby Slowik and then the Jeff Strouser, or Chris Strouser, sorry, was brought in from a different system. I want the OC and the O-line coach to be kind of tethered in this whole thing. I want them to be side by side. In fact, I would, the OC I think should have the biggest hand in picking the O-line coach for this thing. It wouldn't bother me if they were both coming from with each other from somewhere where they've worked together before. I think there were parts of this that were doomed from the start just because you hired an offensive line coach that was not steeped in this Kubiak-Shanahan system. Before this past season, he was contemplating retirement. Man, find somebody who is all in, who's attached to the OC. I don't even need to keep the Kubiak-Shanahan system anymore in place, if you want to know the truth. I think pick a system that CJ Stroud's comfortable with, that you feel like you got the pieces to be successful with, and then let's fucking go. So that's thought number 3. I think thought number 4. I think that was thought number 3. I'm kind of riffing right now. By the way, subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. I think it's interesting that Gerard Johnson did not get swept up in this wave of firings. Gerard Johnson is still with the team. Bill Lazor, who's a senior offensive assistant, is still with the team. So that would appear to at least be some sort of tip of the hat to keeping some continuity for CJ. Gerard and CJ have a relationship that goes back several years, back to when CJ Stroud went to the Elite 11 before he even set foot on campus at Ohio State. So I could see, I don't know if that means Gerard is a candidate to become the offensive coordinator. I'll be honest, there's a big part of me that just wants to go outside the organization to go get an offensive coordinator, not keep it inside. But Gerard Johnson surviving. Now, Gerard is reportedly going to interview for some offensive coordinator positions, at least the Jets, I know, is one of them. Albert Breer reported that. But Gerard surviving, I think, is something interesting to watch, because the fact of the matter is that CJ Stroud is now officially on that gerbil wheel of young quarterbacks who are going to have had multiple coordinators early on in their career amidst failure. It's one thing to have multiple coordinators because you had a great first few years and your OC moves on to get a head coaching job somewhere. CJ is officially on that gerbil wheel where now he's experienced some adversity and failure, and the OC got fired, and you're bringing in a new one. So I think, where Gerard falls into all that, we'll see. I'm confident that CJ Stroud will handle change just fine, but the graveyard is full of way more quarterbacks that didn't handle that well, than there are quarterbacks who did. I don't know why the good quarterbacks would be in a graveyard necessarily. You get what I'm saying. There's a lot more quarterbacks out there where the multiple coordinator thing has not worked out. I don't think it's CJ's fault that Bobby Slowik's getting fired. I think it's Bobby Slowik's fault, and probably the offensive line, their fault that Bobby Slowik no longer has a job. But it's crazy to think, man, this is a guy that a year ago, Bobby Slowik, was one of the hot candidates to become a head coach. He actually stuck around and everybody was celebrating it last year. I think he got a raise. Gerard stuck around. Continuity was going to be the big reason why this offense was going to go to new heights. That and the acquisitions they made in Mixon and Diggs was going to go to new heights, and it did the complete opposite of that. It collapsed. So those are my thoughts on the Bobby Slowik firing. Keep it tuned to Sports Radio 610 all day, all weekend. Well, I say all day long, not all weekend. We're going to be carrying the games this weekend. But I would say keep it tuned to everybody's social media on Sports Radio 610 as we'll continue to share thoughts. This is a huge development. This is the biggest off-field development by far of the DeMeco Ryans era so far, is the firing of offensive coordinator Bobby Slowik. So keep it tuned to Sports Radio 610. Appreciate everybody downloading the podcast. Subscribe, rate, review. You want to send me an email about this? This will be a huge topic on next week's mailbag episode of Utopia, HOUmailbag@gmail.com. So have a great weekend. Enjoy the games, everybody. Bobby Slowik era is over, and now the search for an offensive coordinator begins. Have a nice weekend.